All right, Mike here for the Captain Phoenix channel again. I know it's been a long time since I posted a video, and that was because I moved 900 miles across the country and I took my business with me. So welcome to the new studio. Hope you like it. Today, I'm going to do something kind of random where I'm just going to review a Destiny video. If you guys don't know him, he's a political, he has a YouTube channel, but he's famous for his Twitch streams, and he does politics. So, and he does it from a decidedly left perspective. So left of center perspective. So I haven't seen much of this video, but it is going to be reviewing. So Destiny reviewed a video by Ben Shapiro about, I think it's, let me see what the name of the title is here. Yeah, Ben Shapiro is wrong, and here's why, and I think it's on systemic racism. Yeah, so I've only watched the first minute or so just to get a start. The whole video is like 40 minutes long, so we're not going to do the whole thing. But let's dive right on in. Hopefully the audio works out. Who knows?
Worthwhile going through them a little bit. So we're going to play the video, we'll stop it, we'll discuss. This video is sponsored by the Ben & Brothers brand new course, Expert Ownership. You can learn to own a business without it owning you. Stick around to the end of the video to find out more details.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood.
I should also just offer a brief disclaimer. I have not seen the Ben Shapiro video yet.
All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes. So
Ben Shapiro. Stop. Does he have a computer? Answer, yes. Does he have Wikipedia? Answer, yes. Who cares if his school is underfunded? Bam.
I can't tell if Destiny's being sarcastic or not, but this is actually right. I did a video on this. I'll link that video in this video's description. Overall spending on education from the public sector does not have any correlation with educational outcomes K through 12. So I already did that video. Video's in this description's link. So yeah, Destiny actually gets one right. Can't tell if it's being sarcastic or not, but he's right.
Damn.
his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities.
So let's talk for a second about school policy. The reality is that if you wanted Jamal to be able to go to Kevin's school, what you'd want is something called school vouchers. You want people to be able to move away from their school districts. One of the chief reasons that Jamal is confined to his local public school is because of democratic policy that has decided that you must go to school in the district where you live. And this is also
correct.
why a lot of people...
Okay, no. Okay, there are so many. How many different problems are there? Let's see. Number one, okay, let's say there's a dirty room in your house, okay? Well, what would you do? Should you clean the room? No. Let's get a voucher and go to another room. Fuck that room.
That is a terrible analogy, right? So that's a situation where you have no control over the broom. So if there's no way to control the broom, then you have no other choice than to solve that problem with your feet. And that's not what you're getting at. See, in this case, what you have with the free market is you can vote with your wallet. Right. So this is not a case of Ecuadorians moving from Ecuador to the United States and saying, hey, Ecuadorians, you should stay in Ecuador and fix your problems rather than running away from them. This is not somebody running away from the problem. The problem is the school itself. Right. The problem is not contained within the school in a manner that the kid has any control over, or that the parent at any specific to that has any control over outside of at the voting booth. But at the same time, you can now vote with your feet by moving to another school district and take your money with you if you have a voucher. That's how this works. That's the analogy, right? So if you have a messy room in your house, you have a broom, you sweep up the mess. That's very different from a situation where you have a messy house because of a crappy roommate who's making a giant mess and you can't keep up with it and you can't stand living with that roommate. So what are you left with? You can either kick out the roommate, which is impossible because of government negotiated contracts, or you leave.
Let it be dirty and filthy and who cares when we can go to another room? One, it's stupid because you're ignoring the problems that exist in the primary school district. One. Number two, you assume that even with a voucher, the parent.
Right, and most of those problems would be resolved if they actually had to respond to market influences, but they don't. And a huge part of that is the fact that you aren't allowed even to go to another school district in most states.
Parents have the ability to transport this kid to a school that might be 20 or 30 minutes away. Stupid. 3.
That's what the vouchers are there for. Because if you can transport your kid to a school in my town that's 20 minutes away, right? Because New Milford High School in New Milford, Connecticut is 20 minutes away from huge swaths of northern New Milford. Obviously, that money is in there. So if they wanted to go to Kent High School instead, which is 5 minutes away, that's what that voucher would do. It includes those transportation costs. Also, if it doesn't include those transportation costs, if we're going to a much more expensive school district, how else is he going to get into that district? If you don't allow them to make that decision for themselves, they can't possibly make that decision. Come on.
3, not everybody can get a school voucher. Imagine you've got 2 different schools and half the students from the first school get a voucher to the second school. You're going to degrade the quality of education in the second school because now you're overcrowding the classrooms.
Not if you have the money to spend on expanding the classroom space.
This is such a stupid point. Like on those 3 fundamental levels. 1, you're not fixing or addressing the initial problems. 2,
you are, by voting with your feet. Because if they no longer have that money, then what's going to happen? Either they get their act together or the school district goes under. Yeah, that's how this works. Either the school district goes under and nobody attends that school district, or they get their act together. You can't do that when you can't vote with your feet.
2, parents can't transport their kids to schools that are super far away. And 3, you're going to end up overcrowding schools if everybody vouches.
Some parents can't transport their kids many miles away. Some parents can. Now they have a choice. And again, if you're like me and you live in New Milford and you live in northern New Milford, it is if you live in Gaylord, northern Gaylordsville, it's a much shorter drive to the South Kent School or to the Kent School than it is to New Milford High School. It might even be, and if you live in northeastern New Milford, it might even be a shorter drive to Chippewa Valley Regional High School than to New Milford High School. Come on, man.
Vouchers out of the ones to the good ones. 4, I think. No, I was going to say some schools will let you do this based on lottery, but if he's truly advocating for vouchers, then everybody could choose one. But then you run back into the issues for 2 or 3. This is so stupid.
No, it's not.
Have left lower income areas and moved out to higher income areas specifically for better public schools. It has decided that you must go to school in the district where you live. And this is also why a lot of people have left lower income areas and moved out to higher income areas specifically for better public schools. So if you want...
Hey, this is the unironic just move to a wealthy area argument. Not everybody can do that.
The argument that you made and doubled down on like less than a year ago. The Our Destiny Reddit boards blew up when you made this statement, which he's not telling people to do. He's using it to prove the point that this happens all the time, and this is what people would prefer to do in a lot of cases, or at least prefer to be able to do in virtually every case.
Not everybody can just move. This is actually just move. What the fuck? Economics is just stupid. Destiny. Excuse me, Tordam. What the fuck did I just say that violates anything? School vouchers incentivize better schools?
They obviously do.
What do you mean, how?
Because you can vote with your wallet and your feet if you have a voucher system. You got 2 hardware stores. One's a crappy hardware store. One's a great hardware store. Half the people, 50 people go to the crappy hardware store. 50 people go to the new good hardware store. Well, if they don't like the crappy hardware store, they can go to the good hardware store and they can take their money there with them. And guess what happens to the crappy hardware store? Either it gets better or it goes out of business, and then the good hardware store assumes the entirety of the rest of the business and gets 100 people going to their store. So those 100 people got the better hardware store. Or they get 2 hardware stores and the first hardware store in the first place gets better. That's how this works. Either the school system is rewarded with that money and improves their ways, or they go under. Come on, man. This is like middle school economics.
Explain. The funding for the school.
It's the law of demand. Give me a break.
It's the same. Schools are funded via your property taxes. How are kids vouchering into your school going to change the funding for your school? How does it...
Because the property taxes are the voucher. Jesus.
Incentivize anything. wow, my school is really great. Now it's fucking flooded by 400 kids that are coming in outside the district with vouchers to come.
Oh my God. What happens when new business comes to a town and the population grows naturally? You build more classroom space. That's exactly what's happening here. You get these vouchers that allow you to transfer into new school districts. And the school districts, if you don't have Democrats running them, can charge a certain amount for tuition that's perhaps includes capital investment costs.
Come in and overcrowd my classroom sizes. I want to hear this explanation. I want to hear how vouchers incentivize better schools. Tordam in Twitch chat.
Law of demand. Do you understand the law of demand? Vouchers result in better schools because law of demand.
You got the floor, bud.
3 words, law of demand, Destiny.
Why would make the schools better if people can't choose? Why would you make schools better if people can't choose? Because you have elections for school superintendents. Because people that live in the community send their kids to these schools and are vested in the outcomes, their children's lives. That they have an investment in their kids' education.
You have an election every however many years, which means you don't have to respond to market influences, which happen constantly, everywhere, all the time, and from everything. So which one is more responsive? An election you have every 2 years, dependent on 51%, dependent on the people that actually go to the ballot and turn out. And it's 51% of what winds up being a wildly uninformed electorate making a decision that is almost always based on a popularity contest at the local level, right? Like, how well do you know these people? How well do you personally like their personality? It's almost never based on actual qualifications. So which one is more responsive to the will of the people? Something where everybody's voting all of the time from everywhere with their wallets and with their feet, or something where you have one election for one person who then becomes supreme dictator every 2 years.
That they would be pushing for better school policies. What do you mean, my dude? It's not all about fucking market forces here, right? The idea is that you just vote LOL for it. You're banned. You're fucking stupid as fuck. I'm really sorry. Apparently you came from one of these poor school districts and your parents couldn't afford to send you to a better one. So if anything was an example of how correct my argument is, it's you existing in this chat.
You just proved Ben's case. Not your argument. You just proved Ben's argument. Thank you.
Good luck in life, my dude. Hopefully fucking Biden gets some universal education or some shit fucking passed and you go back to school and get your GED so the next time you show up in this chat, you're not dumb as fuck.
Want Jamal to have the same educational opportunities as Kevin. Perhaps you should have school vouchers for private schools, or perhaps you should have charter schools, which is what Mayor Bill de Blasio in New York is fighting against, or perhaps you should break the teachers' unions, which are costing a fortune, particularly on a disproportionate level in areas where they're not spending enough taxpayer dollars. So I'm all for improving Jamal's schools. I'm also all for Jamal having all the same educational opportunities as Kevin. The problem is most Democrats are not.
Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better...
Oh, God. Here we go. This is the video that's going to get me banned from YouTube. Here we go. Systemic racism. By the way, I did not realize this was like super duper Inception. I'm watching Destiny, watch Ben Shapiro, watch a video on systemic racism.
Let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents.
In order to understand what's going to happen in this video, you have to understand how systemic racism is being defined. Systemic racism is a really amorphous term. It could mean many things. It could mean that the institutions of today are racist, in which case everyone would oppose them. Or it could mean that all...
I thought voucher systems work by providing schools with equal funding for each student. Even if that was true, we could identify a fuck ton of problems with that system as well.
No, you dumb fuck. All right, so here's how this works. At least this is how this works throughout the overwhelming majority of the United States. So at the town level, at the municipal level, you have property taxes and you get some funding from other sources. But for the overwhelming majority of public education in K through 12 at the municipal level in the public sector is funded, yes, by primarily property taxes. That goes into this fund, and the fund then gets divided, and then you can basically say each student costs this much to send to the school. Yes, there are non-variable costs, but if you were to just take that simple, total pool over number of students, you could say very generically that there's some dollar amount you can attribute to the student. That voucher, what the voucher is that dollar amount in property taxes is no longer going to go to New Milford public schooling system. It's going to go to the New Fairfield public schooling system because you like New Fairfield better, or the Danbury public schooling system, which would be a joke, and if you liked Danbury public schooling system better, and you'd go to Danbury or New Fairfield instead. It's a 1-to-1 translation of property taxes. Duh.
Let's see if one school that's marginally better than another school, and now all the kids start to voucher out of one school to the other. That school that's shit.
Yeah, either that or so the other way that these vouchers have been proposed is however much you pay in property taxes, which for a lot of people is nothing. But let's say you pay X dollars amount in property taxes, you get to send your kid to wherever based on those property taxes. There's 2 ways to do this, right? There's 2 ways to do this. Those are the 2 ways. I don't think Destiny quite gets how this works.
Shit is going to be forever shit. It's going to lose all of its funding as students voucher out of that, and then more funding goes to the other school.
Right, which can then, oh my God, which is what you want to have happen, right? If everyone can afford to leave New Milford Public Schools and go to New Fairfield instead because it's just a better public schooling system, then guess how much it costs taxpayers to run a school with 0 attendance?
Even that's not a good system. What do you mean?
That's a great system because 0 people have to deal with New Milford Public High School, and all of the rest of them can go to the better high school in New Fairfield.
Inequality is explainable by racism, which of course is not sustainable. It's not a good argument. The argument that this video is going to try to make is that all of history has meaning. And that is true. History does have consequences for today. The problem is, as we'll see, the video tries to explain all inequality with reliance on history and no inequality with response to exacerbating levels of income inequality, exacerbating levels of single motherhood, personal decision-making, or any of the other variables that could come.
In the scientific method, this is what we would call variables, and they would be what we would call independent variables. So the dependent variable would be the outcome, and the outcome is dependent upon the independent variables, right? So obviously, if somebody is white and is a dickhead and decides to just not show up for school every day, that might affect their outcomes, right? That might affect what their GPA is in high school, and because they just don't feel like showing up to school. Yeah, so that wouldn't be an element of racism. That would be an element of them making a dumb decision on their own. So in the scientific method, what you would want to do is control for these variables. When you perform a multivariate analysis, you try to perform an analysis which allows you to walk these variables out of it, so that all you're left with are the only variables that actually have an effect here. So if you wanted to evaluate the level of contribution of racism, if you want to call it that, then you need to control for everything that isn't racism, like some dumb fuck deciding not to go to school for an entire year. But watch as Destiny doesn't understand the scientific method. Variable control, folks.
Come into creating the gaps we see today.
Ah, yes. All great economists, when they model economic theory or when they model consumer behavior, yes, well, here's the variable for personal decision making. Like, nobody in academia, nobody even in the field of economics is going to sit here and be like, oh, yes, well, ordinarily our models would predict this, or we would talk about this in terms of income inequality, or we talk about this in terms of quintiles of wealth, but we didn't factor in personal decision making. Well, and it's funny because
Because it's obviously a variable you would need to control. If white dude, white straight cisgender male or whatever, if I decided just on a whim not to go to school, that would be a contributing factor in terms of my outcome, right? Which has nothing to do with my race and everything to do with what's going on up here and not what's going on right here. Hello?
I would almost like extend an olive branch here to Shapiro, and that terms like systemic racism can be amorphous. People define these differently, sure, for 100%. But when you come out swinging with a term like personal decision making,
decades after the Civil War, many government agencies.
How is that amorphous or ambiguous? A person makes a decision.
Started to draw maps
It's
dividing
a literal
cities
translation.
into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining,
And it's
it
been
usually
illegal for
blocked off
years.
entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race.
Something that's been illegal for like 30 years.
Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined.
Okay, so Thomas Sowell actually talks about this as discrimination 1 versus discrimination 2, and I'm absolutely certain Ben Shapiro is going to bring this up. So when you don't have enough information, then you have to draw a line somewhere. So what they did was they said in these districts, right, they drew a red line around these districts where they're just not going to issue loans because generally speaking, these people tend to have terrible credit. Notice how I didn't make any reference to race whatsoever. The fact that there coincidentally happen to be, say, more black people there is a coincidence because they are incidental to each other and not dependent upon each other.
So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce.
Okay, the legal segregation stuff, it came to an end 50 years ago. 50 years ago, it was made illegal. In fact, 52 years ago, it was made illegal. And for the most part, believe it or not, it was illegal in virtually every state in the Union before the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1968. Anyways, and on top of that, the free market was already trying to walk away from this. This was a government-enforced law, right? If you looked at private schools in the South, if you look at a place like Duke University, was trying desperately in North Carolina to get away from to start allowing blacks into their school, and they weren't allowed to do that. I think North Carolina allowed integration in the 1920s. I'd have to look it up. North Carolina was actually before places like Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, right? The Deep South. But the point is the same. Like, businesses were already trying to make this transition. The Democrat-controlled government was not allowing them to do that.
So let's talk about redlining. Redlining became illegal in the United States as early as 1968. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act was followed by the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act of 1970.
1968 is not that long ago.
It's 52 years ago. Do you remember where Asians were? Do you remember where Asians were, say, around 1932? Let's add 52 years to that. That's 1984. And suddenly they're way outperforming even whites in the U.S. And if we walk that back to 1932, how are they performing? Probably terribly. What kind of discrimination were they facing? Go to San Francisco in 1932, homie.
People seem to have these things where, like, this was so, like, the first black girl, the first black person to go to a non-segregated school, I think just turned like 68 years old. Okay, like,
how about the first Asian girl?
That's pretty insane. Okay, a lot of people have parents who are in the position they are because the grandparents, like were college educated, grew up in wealthy neighborhoods. Like, I'm sorry, 65 years old. Yeah, like, these people are not, like, this was not like ancient history. People act like this is like, yeah.
True, but again, you get a group of people like Asians who face basically the identical conditions, especially during World War II. Like, who was the enemy in World War II? There's a reason we have a term called zipperheads. There's a reason we have a term called gooks, which came from well, it's hard to tell exactly where that came from, but it became popular in the mainstream during Vietnam in the 1960s, which carried on to the 1970s. Do you really think Asian Americans didn't face some sort of systemic discrimination because of their race during World War II, when a group of Asians blew up Pearl Harbor? And we here in the United States, we're terrible at discerning visually from Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, Southeast Asians like the Vietnamese, the Laotians, Indonesians. We're terrible at discerning between the groups. So, what kind of discrimination do you think Japanese felt? How about 117,000 of them? The ones that got sent to internment camps, that got actually sent to internment camps. How were they treated in the 1940s? And where are they now?
75, which was a predecessor to the Community Reinvestment Act, both of which were an attempt to ensure that people who are living in low-income minority neighborhoods could actually get loans. And these things were very effective. In 1992, researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston tried to look at the data. They collected information on some 30 variables related to lending decisions. They found that virtually all of the difference between minority and non-minority denial rates was explained by those variables. A reanalysis of that information found that black-owned banks were actually lending to white-owned businesses at higher rates than they were lending to black-owned businesses.
Let's see the Kafka trap that Destiny sets to discredit actual research.
What's your current thoughts on this defund the police and abolition 8 thing? It seems to be gaining steam.
It's stupid. It's not gaining steam. It'll stop in a fucking couple weeks. No one cares. It's dumb. They're like, reforming the police is good. The idea behind abolishing or defunding the police is complicated and stupid, and people always have to re-explain everything. It's stupid messaging.
Hey, Destiny actually gets one right. By the way, folks, since Destiny isn't a crazy leftist, he is left of center, but he's not a crazy leftist. This is why I like watching him. Link is in the description.
Okay, you have to be really careful sometimes when you talk about like, oh, well, actually, we did not like. If I walk into a room and I hand out $100 to all the white kids and I give $10 to all the black kids, and then I bring in an ice cream shop and I say, well, I'm going to sell ice cream to everybody in here, and I'm going to charge $20 per ice cream. And then, we come at the end of the day to find out, like, oh, none of the black kids were able to get any of the ice cream. All the white kids got ice cream. And then we were to do an analysis afterwards. And it's like, okay, well, we analyzed using 3 different independent methods to figure out, like, if the ice cream sellers were engaging in racial discrimination at all. And when we did the analysis, we actually found out, no, they actually weren't engaging in racial discrimination at all.
Right, so you can't call the ice cream man racist. Jesus Christ.
We're doing was selling to the people that could afford it. Like, it's kind of true, but it's also kind of sort of missing, like, the bigger picture, right? Like, it's not surprising that black banks are
Here comes the amorphous definition.
lending more to white people, or that white banks are lending more to white people because of
Want to talk about Asians and how well Asians get lent to?
economic reasons. I mean, like, we're literally just coming out of, like, segregation and shit. Like, yeah. Like, there's already been, like, a lot of...
The country isn't 250 years old, and we're 52 years out of any type of legal discrimination based on race anywhere. Like more than a fifth of the age of the country. At some point, you got to draw a line, Destiny. Like what would you say about Jews who were discriminated against by the pharaohs of ancient Egypt? Dude, are they facing systemic racism? Are they facing some sort of discrimination effects from thousands of years ago? Where do you draw the line? Or don't you? Right? And it's stupid. Of course they draw a line. Where? When is enough and you're going to actually agree with what the research is showing?
Economic harm committed amongst, like, African Americans. Like, it's not really that surprising that banks that only loan or only loan to wealthier people also tend to loan to white people, right? Like, yeah. Love you, Steven. Bonus meme, no bonus meme, bet shot. No, Dr. Jeezy. Nice job. Okay.
There's actually a term for this, arguing from the results rather than arguing from the inputs. I forget what it was. I should look that up.
Furthermore, if it seemed that banks were discriminating against black borrowers on the basis of they needed to have higher credit qualifications, what you would see is lower default rates from black clients of banks, from people who are borrowing money from banks in the black community. There are 0 studies that show any of this. So the bottom line is this. Redlining was an evil and awful policy. It was made illegal in the 1960s. By the 1980s, the banks were not lending at disproportionate rates. In fact, if you look at among different communities, as Thomas Sowell has pointed out, Asian Americans get loans.
This is like 15 years later, right? Like, we know that economic harms can ripple throughout generations. Like, this is known.
And he isn't denying that. Did you watch the same video that I'm watching right now with you?
Right? Like, it's so funny that on one hand, conservatives will say, like, dude, this was 20 years ago, and then they will fucking fight you to death on things like an inheritance tax, right? You want to tax my fucking inheritance? That's for my fucking children, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, they'll be like, okay, so what?
Yeah, so that actually allows for the transfer of wealth to the next generation. It actually incentivizes the building of the wealth in the first place, because believe it or not, when people have kids, Destiny, unlike you, I know, shot across the bow, right? Unlike you, most people really care about their kids, and all of a sudden their kids take over their entire lives, and everything they do, it becomes for their kids. That's the overwhelming majority of adults who have kids, at least intentionally, here in the United States. So, I know it was a cheap shot, but, like, bro, the whole point of Ben Shapiro, I guarantee you the reason he builds the wealth that he's building is because he's looking after his kids, right? And that he wants everything he worked for to be able to transfer to his kids, right? And if black people build this wealth. Maybe it's not as much as Ben Shapiro builds, but maybe it's some wealth, right? And they have something to pass on to the progeny. How is it going to help them to not be able to pass that on to their progeny, both from the perspective of an incentive and from the perspective of vertical mobility, right? Like, you complain about mobility here in the United States. This is one great way to have that mobility, right? Is to be able to say to your kids, hey, listen, I worked my ass off. I started my own business, and now I get to send my kids to college. And once they've gotten out of college, maybe they can send their kids to college on my dime, because that's what I'm looking after. Like, the argument for the inheritance tax is not the argument that you're making. It's actually in support of what Ben Shapiro's making, if we're going to look at it from that perspective. The argument against the inheritance tax is that it's a tax on a tax. Like, it's money that you've already spent, and you cannot, let me turn this light off. You cannot make a moral argument in favor of the inheritance tax that actually holds muster, right? Like, it's immoral to tell people how, my body, my choice, right? So his body, his choice, after his body is decomposed, this is what he'd like to do with the fruits of his labor.
But if your fucking grandpa was in a fucking all-black school, come on, is it that big of a deal, dude? This was fucking 35 years ago, dog. Get over it. Like, holy shit. Like,
okay, how about the Jews? Again, are the Jews an oppressed group that we need to hand money out to? Or are they doing way better than the rest of what we would call whites in the United States? Are they doing, in some cases, better, even if we're talking about Ashkenazi Jews in the United States? Are they doing even better than the Asians and South Koreans, if we're going to get very specific about this? Yeah, so were they oppressed 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago? Again, where do you draw the line? It doesn't seem like you're building an argument to actually draw a line. In fact, it sounds like you're building an argument that there is no line to draw.
chill. Well, like, which is it? Like, does it matter what you leave onto your kids, or is it bullshit? Like,
okay, a binary decision, so
easily
there's
than
no
white
line to
Americans.
draw.
That does not mean the banks are being racist toward white Americans on behalf of Asian Americans. When it comes to college education, it is also worth noting that, yes, there were many universities that were segregated. There were many universities that did not allow black people to attend. Since the 1970s, the most prominent measure that has been used in order to admit black students to major universities across the
Focus.
thank you.
country has been affirmative action, which actively discriminates against people who are not black in favor of black applicants, specifically by ensuring that black applicants don't have to have the same test scores or GPAs in order to get into those same schools. So not only has policy been corrected, it's been overcorrected in these areas.
Kevin's grandparents.
My understanding, we should do like a stream. I need to put this in the back burner someday, where we look at like, my understanding is that just like affirmative action never works out like quite that simple. Like, I think the way that it worked in
MKBHD, Marquez Brownlee, actually just did a video on this, and he's black, and it was an highly introspective video on his race, right? And nobody, by the way, no fan of Marquez has ever looked at him as black. He's a freak athlete, like an unbelievable freak athlete who is, in my opinion, the most underrated player in the entire ADL, and has been for a while, and was probably the most underrated player in the MLU when he was playing in the MLU. Also, he's a giant nerd who's got the best tech channel on the internet. And in my opinion, I would compare his tech channel. He might have the best tech channel and tech show there is. Period. No one sees him for what he is as black, which was really cool to see him have this really introspective video. And one of his complaints was he had this thought in his head of, did I make it because I'm black? Like, were these advantages of, was I able to get into these college because I'm black, or was it because I actually deserved it? And bro, MKBHD, if you wind up seeing this video, bro, you deserved it. Like, you're a freak athlete who was a remarkable student in high school and college, from what I understand, and who has the best tech show on the internet, at least. And this is coming from a dude who's black. So yeah, obviously these are real concerns, and nothing that Ben Shapiro has said about that is untrue.
I think the way that it worked in Harvard was that they basically have like all their normal admissions process, and then I think they have like an extra 200 students that they can accept for other reasons. Like, I don't even think this includes academic stuff. I think for whatever things, and then in those extra like qualifying things of that extra group of students, they would enact some affirmative action policies. So
the solution to racism is more racism. That's what Destiny's saying. Good on Destiny. The solution to racism is more racism, right? By the way, I love this hypothetical because it's such an easy hypothetical to debunk. You've got two college students who are on paper perfectly identical, perfectly identical, right? There's no way to discern between the two applicants, right? One's black, one's white. Let's say it's John Smith and John Smith, right? Or John Brown and John Brown, right? And you can't even discern from their names if they're white or if they're black. One's white, one's black, right? Now you ask them which one's white and which one's black. Now you've discriminated based on race. How then, in scale, how do you split a hair? Well, if we're talking about equal opportunity, then what you would expect is if you did this example hundreds and hundreds of times, that half the time the white guy would get in and half the time the black guy would get in, because you've got absolutely identical inputs. You would expect a 50-50 output. How do you do something that has an absolutely perfectly 50-50 outcome? Let me reach into my pocket and pull out a quarter and woo! Yeah, folks, you flip a coin. Like, come on, this isn't that hard. If you have to split a hair on two candidates who are absolutely identical, the appropriate thing to do is to create some sort of randomized selection and not ask about the race.
I think was how it worked. But it wasn't just like, oh, like all of these white people and all of these Asians that otherwise would have made it, like got fucked or whatever. That's not usually how it works.
No, actually, that's exactly how it works. And there are these point systems that exist in these colleges, namely Harvard, I think the one you mentioned, which actually deducts points right from their raw test scores on things like ACT and SAT scores from Asians. That's why that lawsuit has been brought upon. I think it was actually Harvard by Asians in the first place. It was because of this system.
Friends, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and get accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids.
The basic assumption of this video is that if your grandparents are rich in the United States, this means that you are rich in the United States. And that if your grandparents are poor in the United States, that means that you are poor in the United
Twitch
States.
chat.
That's not actually necessarily true, but I don't know that Ben's going to explain why this is the case, right? So if my great 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 grandfather happened to have been a pharaoh of Egypt thousands and thousands and thousands of years later, am I going to be as rich in relative terms as the pharaohs of Egypt? Did it just come from the ether? Or do people blow money on stupid shit? And if you've got a lot of money to blow on stupid shit, yeah, it's going to take a while before you run out of money. But yes, you are eventually going to run out of money. So you've all heard the saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed a man for life. There's actually two lessons to come from that idiom, right? The obvious one is that that it's better to teach somebody to fish than it is to just give them the fish, because learning to fish, the actual learned skill, is better to have than the thing. So it's better to have the skill to get the thing than it is to have the thing. There's another lesson though, and that is if you keep giving a man a fish, he's going to eat that fish, and he's never going to do anything else with that fish, and he's never going to have more than one fish. If you teach a man to fish, you've made him self-sufficient. You're no longer giving him fish. So now he has to fish for himself. So either he will starve or he will be as productive as he can possibly be, right? And then, of course, in a market society, he would be able to catch more fish than he could possibly consume and then trade that excess for other things. The lesson here is that if you just give somebody a freaking handout, what are they going to learn to do? What is the learned behavior that they're going to exhibit? That they're going to depend on just getting the fish and they're going to consume all of it at once, right? If you teach a man to fish and give him nothing, he's going to have to learn to be self-sufficient, which means he's either going to starve or learn to actually be productive rather than just kicking his feet up and draining off the dole.
This is factually untrue. The reality is that income changes over time, that there are an enormous number of people in the United States by percentage who are able to rise from poor to middle class and their children from middle class to wealthy. The biggest problem that we have in the United States right now is not a historic wealth gap. The biggest problem we have is an income gap in the United States. And there's some fascinating statistics surrounding this. There was a Harvard study recently that showed that black males who are growing up in the same household incomes as white males were actually underperforming their white male counterparts, even in high-income neighborhoods. You would think that all of this might imply racism, except for one inconvenient fact in the study. Black women who are growing up in the same high-income neighborhood.
Okay, this is not true. Well, it's kind of true.
They did the research. It's true. In fact, here's another little tidbit I'll have to look up, and I'm not going to put it up for the stream. Did you know that Islander blacks, Caribbean blacks, right, when they come to the United States, even to this day, right, the second generation blacks from the Caribbean islands, and I think this is actually true of most of African immigrants to the United States. So black African immigrants to the United States, by the time you get to the second generation, they're actually way ahead of their native black counterparts, right? And on top of that, as I recall, and I could be wrong in this, I'm pretty sure that once you get even to the second generation, these immigrants, the second generation start outperforming whites.
Like, people have been making gains, of course, but there is something in America. The concept is called stickiness at the ends, okay? The idea is that Americans raised at the bottom and top of the family income ladder are likely to remain there as adults, a phenomenon known as stickiness at the ends. While a majority of Americans exceed their parents' family incomes, the extent of that increase is not always enough to move them to a different rung of the family income ladder. 43% of Americans raised in the bottom.
Right, because get this, like I said, if you've got more money to blow on stupid shit, you have more time to blow that money on the stupid shit before it runs out. And if you don't have as much money to blow on stupid shit, then you have less money to blow on that stupid shit before time runs out.
Bottom quintile, that's the bottom 20%, remain stuck in the bottom as adults, and 70% remain below the middle. 40% raised to the top quintile remain at the top as adults, and 63% remain above the middle.
In one generation.
Only 4% of those raised in the bottom quintile make it all the way to the top as adults, confirming that the rags to riches story is more often found in Hollywood than in reality. Similarly,
if we're talking about literal rags to riches, this is why the inheritance tax is such a dumb. It's just such a dumb concept, right? I realize that it's only going to be applying to the richest 4% or whatever it is, but philosophically, if you were to apply it to the lowest rung, obviously it's going to hinder them from moving up. Right. The other thing to consider here is there are other factors to consider as to why they don't move. Right. Degenerate fucks, if you've ever worked with them, are going to remain degenerate fucks. It's kind of like addiction, right? Like I can't convince somebody to get out of addiction. They have to do it on their own. That has to be a conscious effort that they make inside their own heads. And if you're going to be a degenerate ass, if you're going to be a degenerate clown, that's a decision you have to walk away from yourself. Nothing is going to control that. No amount of giving you free money is going to change the fact that you're a degenerate fuck.
Just 8% of those raised at the top quintile fall all the way to the bottom.
Wanted to get your input. What do you think about keeping or aborting a child fetus with Down syndrome? My wife is pregnant with our second child and are testing next week for it. BC, her family has history of DS great aunt. Thanks.
Dude, I can't make that decision for you. I don't even know why you would ask me. Like, wait, I'm curious I'm curious.
That is a terribly immoral reason to get an abortion.
I want to be in the room when they do.
Like, even if you agree that abortion should be legal, and even if you agree that should be a legal reason to get the abortion, that is just a reprehensible reason to get an abortion. Right? Like, there are plenty of things that are perfectly legal to do which are morally reprehensible.
Is it an amniocentesis or whatever, where they poke in and check for Down syndrome, and the doctors...
Right, I'll give you a for instance. I dated a girl who was a social worker, not the take babies from mommy social worker, the kind that, like, it helps people by giving them, helping them throughout their life. It's a life coach, if you will, right? And the number of clients she had where they said they're running out of money, so to get more WIC and food stamps, they're going to go have another kid. Do you see where this is going, folks?
It's like, it looks like your kid's gonna have Downs, and then what are you gonna tell your wife? Like, hey, like,
like it's clearly legal for you to have another kid so you can get more WIC and food stamps, but completely immoral.
I was listening to this Twitch streamer, and he actually said we should abort our kids. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the trigger on that option. Thanks, Doc. Like, I can't give you advice on that. Jesus.
I could still call it immoral, and so can you, Destiny. Like, it's a terrible reason to do that sort of thing.
Blacks have a harder time exceeding the family income and wealth of their parents than do whites. 66% of blacks raised in the second quintile surpass their parents' family income, compared with 89% of whites. Only 23% of blacks raised in the middle surpass their parents' family wealth, compared with over half of whites.
Could it be culture? Could it be decision making? Because if one group happens to fall into the larger umbrella of degenerate fucks, and I don't mean to that's not racist. I'm not calling all blacks degenerate fucks, right? Like, if you go to the hills of Appalachia, you'll find a lot of white degenerate fucks. If you go to Central Tennessee, where I just moved from, you'll find a lot of white degenerate fucks, right? Degenerate fucks includes whites, and it includes blacks and Hispanics and Asians. But that bubble, if it's over here, and it's raining more degenerate fuckery on blacks than it is on whites.
Blacks are more likely to be stuck in the bottom and fall from the middle than are whites. I'm sorry, but like, this is just a numbers game. When you bring in these weasel words, where it's like a large number of people increase their a ton of people, but it's like, okay, dude, like, well, what do the numbers say? Like, this is a numbers game, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about all of society.
Also, the quintiles move.
That showed that black males who were growing up in the same household incomes as white males were actually underperforming their white male counterparts, even in high-income neighborhoods. You would think that all of this might imply racism, except for one inconvenience.
So let's see if Destiny says something along the lines of, my statistics are good, but your statistics are useless for no reason. I don't want to subscribe to your data, which is probably from the same resource as his, but my data is good enough.
Convenient fact in the study. Black women who are growing up in the same high-income neighborhoods as white women growing up in the same high-income neighborhoods, black women were performing at exactly the same or higher rates than white women in those neighborhoods, which would suggest that there are other factors at play other than simple racism.
Right, so if you have brother and sister growing up in the exact same household, right, and they've got the exact same mom and dad, like, and the girl performs way better than the black guy. Like, the girl moves 3 quintiles up, and the guy stays in the same quintile. Maybe that's not an element of their race, and maybe it's an element of something else.
Furthermore, the basic idea that most wealth in the United
Anytime somebody starts hitting you up with like very specific examples, you can almost bet your fucking life that
anytime somebody controls variables, that's part of the scientific method, bro.
This is cherry picked like a motherfucker.
No, when you control variables, it means that you're performing a multivariate analysis where the variable you're concerned with is the only variable that is the dependent variable. That means that it's the only thing that can be changing.
When somebody is comparing black women in high-income neighborhoods to white women in I feel like we must be hardcore cherry picking there. What the fuck?
Well, no, because in his hypothetical, Destiny, if it was just race, if race was the only variable that was contributing to income, then you'd expect the white woman to outperform the black woman, because the only variable that matters, according to you, is race. Therefore, you would expect this, and what you're getting is this. Come on, bro. Like, scientific method. Come on.
But okay.
The United States is inherited, and that millionaires are really only millionaires because their parents were millionaires. That really isn't true either. The vast majority of millionaires and billionaires are people whose parents were not millionaires. And
no one cares about this. I saw someone in chat post this. Oh, Destiny, 8 out of 10 millionaires were their parents were. No one gives a fuck about millionaires. We're not talking about millionaires. Okay, we don't care about millionaires. We're talking about like.
What were they before they were millionaires? You stupid shit.
Average, like, normal Americans, how can a normal person expect to be, right? And the normal person probably can't expect to make it to being a millionaire.
Which is exactly your claim. Like, you use this because it debunks your claim, right? And again, what were they before they were millionaires if they weren't millionaires before they were millionaires? Hello, upward mobility is a real thing.
In an appreciable amount of time also. Nobody gives a fuck if you're a millionaire at 80 years old. Congratulations, you've saved up for retirement your whole life, and now you have, 1.2 million stashed away.
And that's how you do it. You make smart decisions. You save your money. You don't spend it on lottery tickets and cigarettes.
For your end-of-life retirement or whatever. No one cares, okay?
Everyone cares. That's how you build wealth.
Billionaires. Chris Hogan, who's a black financial expert, he did a survey of 10,000 people, and what he found was that of those 10,000 people, 74% of millennials believed millionaires inherited their money, 52% of baby boomers did, but only 21% of millionaires received any inheritance at all. Just 16% inherited more than $100,000. Only 3% received an inheritance at or above $1 million.
Here comes the ad hoc argument. You ready for this, guys? Here comes ad hoc argument.
In reality,
Wait, hold on. Oh, God, I'm sorry. He's just like rapid fire shit. I don't understand. Hold on.
Can't hang, bro.
millionaires inherited their money. 52% of baby boomers did. But only 21% of millionaires received any inheritance at all. Just 16% inherited more than $100,000. Only 3% received an inheritance at or above $1 million. In reality, the best path toward wealth in this country is income mobility, not inherited wealth.
This opened up.
Sure, that's true, but nobody, well, maybe some people do. Nobody intelligent would ever say that, like, oh, the reason why all these people are millionaires is because they inherit all their money. Yeah, some dipshit fucking lefties.
And that's the argument. That was the whole point of the argument you just made 5 minutes ago, right? Like, if there's no such thing as income mobility, and the only way you can build wealth is to already have it, which is what you were arguing before.
Some dumb fuck progressives probably say that. But the reality is that being born into a wealthy family confers so many advantages in and of itself. Every dumb fuck in America was like, wow, Bill Gates' children have it so hard because he's going to give away 95% of his wealth, blah, blah, blah. Or, oh my God, Warren Buffett's children have it so hard because he's promised to give away 99% of his wealth. These motherfuckers don't have it hard. These guys are born with a silver spoon and a silver bowl and fucking golden sheets on their beds, okay? These people have awesome connections. They had great fucking schooling. They had amazing fucking parents.
Is that because you actually know who they are? Because Bill Gates could have put his kids up for adoption. Now where they are? Now are they?
They probably excelled in all of their classes. They probably have business friends out the fucking ass. They probably have job connections, life connections, like business connections. They probably have like referrals and clients.
All things Ben is not denying. All things that the data is not denying.
And that they didn't even earn. That, like, there are so many things. There are so many advantages that you get in life by being born into a wealthy family. Like
at an individual level, and a lot of times people are dumb fucks. And over the course of 2 or 3 generations, the data shows that I think it's like 2 generations. I think it's either 2 or 3 generations. People who are in the top quintile, after 2 or 3, is it top quintile or top 1%? Either way, the richest people. Yeah, after it's something like 2 or 3 generations are no longer in there. No, their offspring, their progeny are no longer part of that group.
Like income or just like earning an inheritance? Who the fuck cares?
Once you move
That's like
beyond
the
the
least
first
of
generation,
what you need.
yeah.
Like getting an inheritance is like one of the most worthless things you could get as a kid. Like it's the growing up in that environment confer to you the massive set of advantages that wealthy children have. Not getting a big fucking windfall when your mom and dad kick the bucket.
Okay, so what is the value of those things that are conferred to you by having a rich dad? Well, we can determine that by the outcomes of where they wind up being in terms of that quintile from one generation to the next, which is exactly Ben's point. And by the way, again, I hope Ben brings this up, but I think it's once you get to the 2nd or 3rd generation, so grandkids or great-grandkids, if the grandfather was, say, in the top whatever percentage, those kids are no longer part of that group. I thought it was a top quintile. It could be a 1% thing.
Up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances.
As it turns out, there are some complicating factors that don't get cited in this video with regard to
Let's hear
this
them.
data. The Federal Reserve Board economists tried to explain that this data did not take account of differences that were not income-based. Things like liabilities, employment history, credit record, and other relevant variables that should have been considered. It should not be particularly surprising.
Again, segregation, okay? Till the 1960s was legal. Of course, income
Because they were basing the segregation entirely on race.
history and all this shit is gonna fucking vary. What the fuck? Like, yeah.
So what do you tell the banks then? That they have to prefer the blacks? Is your solution to racism more racism?
Surprising that discrimination in the past has impact on the actual income of people who are living in the areas that were denied loans. That shouldn't be a major surprise. But that is not the only disparity, obviously. That New York Times piece they are citing says, quote, they estimate the maps account for 15 to 30% of the overall gaps in segregation and home ownership that they find between the highest risk area and the second highest risk areas. Those were the ones that were being classified. The truth is that when it comes to redlining, you have to look at the gradations as well. There is always going to be a difference in the availability of loans to people who are living in the highest risk areas as opposed to the people who are in the very lowest risk areas. Another factor is that if history does make a difference, then if you are denied loans in a particular area, and if there's less money in those areas, and as crime goes up, and as property taxes kick in, there's not enough money to take, and as schools get worse, obviously that's going to continue to have effect in that particular area. That doesn't.
He's doing it. He's so close. You're describing the problem. Yes, you're doing it.
And your solution is more racism. Am I going to continue doing this? Because unfortunately, Destiny's editor didn't edit out the parts where Destiny is just typing on his stream.
People are living in that area who always lived in that area, or that people who grew up in that area in 1960 necessarily have to live in that area, or that their grandkids have to live in that area in 2020.
Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that.
No, stupid. Okay, don't get baited into this shit, okay? For my progressives out there, okay? Not my lefties. We don't fuck with lefties. All my homies hate lefties, okay? My progressives out there. The big deal with systemic or structural racism, okay? Please, I want to hear everybody repeating this fucking 2 years from now, and nobody can give me credit for it. I don't give a fuck, okay? The big thing about structural or systemic racism is that it works without any bad actors, is that it perpetuates itself without any individual hating black people explicitly or implicitly. This idea that you need all these people to be implicitly racist or whatever against somebody, and that if we can just fix that, these problems go away, it's not true. Like, these things require like bigger structural upheaval or bigger
Right, changes in culture, which are really, really, really hard and usually take multiple generations to actually influence, as was actually shown in the Reconstruction era and actually during the first abolitionist movement in the United States, which happened in the late 1700s, but nobody wants to talk about.
Breakings of the cycle than just making people more aware of their implicit biases, all right? Don't get baited into defending this. This is a stupid point, and Ben's probably going to argue against it.
Because it's a stupid point, Destiny.
They have
your own admission.
One of the big problems with implicit bias, it is very...
You know what? We're not actually going to do implicit bias because Ben talks about this all the time. And I want to end on a happy note because I actually agree with Destiny. Yes, the implicit bias argument is a dumb argument for, well, honestly, just about all the reasons that Destiny listed. So that was fun. And, I know. I if I was a good faith actor, I would probably watch this whole thing. But this video is already insanely long and we're already like 3 or 4 levels of Inception deep. I've had enough. So... good night, everybody.